I'm standing here in the middle of the Pontar River from the hit 2015 video game The Witcher 3, and I have a question. Is this real? I mean, obviously it's not real, it's a video game, but I just mean, could this happen? Because, let me show you something. If you look on the map in the game, you can see that the river starts down here in the bottom corner, and it supposedly flows this way towards the ocean. But if you actually look in-game, none of this water is flowing. No matter where you look. All of the water along this river from top to bottom is just sitting in the same place. On top of that, there are a bunch of little details that don't seem to make sense. Like this place where there's an offshoot of the river going in the opposite direction that the river's supposedly flowing, and, maybe the weirdest thing of all, there's a whale skeleton in the middle of a swamp nowhere near the ocean. So what's going on with this game? Is it just a crazy fantasy world? Maybe, but I have a theory for how all of this might actually be extremely hydrologically realistic. But in order to see if I'm right, we're going to have to comb over every inch of this non-flowing river, looking at tiny details you would never even think to pay attention to while playing the game. And the very first question we have to address is, why isn't this river flowing? Now, my first thought was probably the same as yours. This is a video game. So maybe the developers just didn't model flowing water because it was simpler and they didn't see a need. We've played games like that before, like Morrowind and even Breath of the Wild to some degree. But if you go up into the mountains east of this river in The Witcher 3, you'll find a whole separate river system, and that whole system has flowing water all over the place. It even has waterfalls. So whatever's going on with the big rivers down below is a lot more complex. Let's take a closer look. One of the first things that stood out to me on this river is back at the edge of the map. The area around here is riddled with evidence of recent flooding. You've got pockets of standing water near the banks of the river. You've got erosion along the waterline indicating that the river was recently higher than it is now. You've got more erosion along the ground where water might have washed away the soil. This was definitely done intentionally. And there's also some good evidence that the river is still near flood stage. If we travel a bit further downstream, we can find this section of the river that's clearly swollen beyond its normal size. It almost looks like a lake, and if we zoom out, we can kind of see how the river would normally flow like this, but at the moment it's so high that it's filling up a low-lying area around its banks. You've also got this big cliff that had one side of itself completely eroded and knocked into the river below, so the flooding must have been pretty substantial. And yet, if we go further, we can find man-made structures built on little islands that are barely more than a couple feet above the waterline. If this area was really prone to flooding, why would they build structures in such high-risk areas? I thought about this for a long time because it really didn't seem like there could possibly be any realistic explanation for all of this, which is fine. It's a video game, it doesn't have to be realistic. But how can you have a non-flowing river that violently floods all the time, but then somehow also have permanent infrastructure built on the same areas that are flooding? It just doesn't really make any sense. At this point, I was pretty close to giving up and dropping this video idea altogether when I stumbled across something that blew the whole investigation wide open. This is a map of the entire canonical world of the Witcher universe, and it turns out that the entirety of The Witcher 3, the huge map that we've been looking at, takes place here, in that tiny little box. And if you look to the right of that tiny little box, you'll see this long blue line going back to the east. That blue line is the Pontar River. So the portion we've been looking at is just the last little itty-bitty piece of it, which means we've been thinking about it all wrong. Here's a question for you. How mad would you be if we transitioned to the sponsorship right now? Not mad at all? Well, great. We actually haven't done a Factor sponsorship in a little while, which may or may not have been my fault for missing a video deadline. So in case you're unfamiliar, here's my pitch for Factor. They deliver meals to your door that you can cook and eat in as little as 2 minutes, and the meals are good, and they're made of real food, and it saves you a ton of time on cooking and shopping. It's great. Since our last sponsorship with them, they have doubled the size of their menu, including more seafood options, more Mediterranean meals, and several new health-related options, including no refined seed oils, for those of you that believe in that. Now, yes, I am saying all of the Factor talking points in the exact order that I was supposed to, because I'm good at my job. But anyone who's been watching the channel for long enough knows that I actually do like Factor. I use Factor. I buy it for myself, even when we're not running sponsorships, just because it's very convenient. And if you want to give it a try, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use promo code AnyAustinFB50. It's a new promo code, okay? Pay attention. AnyAustinFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for 1 year. Free what? What does that mean? Huh. Okay. So yeah, every time you get a box, they'll just put a free. They have these like breakfast things, like egg bites and stuff that you can get. And they'll just give you a free one every time you get a box, I guess, for a year. Okay. Well, I wish I would have read the script ahead of time, but that's just what happens. Promo code AnyAustin FB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for a year. There you go. Anyway. So like I said, this long skinny thing is the Pontar River, and you can see that if you follow it back up to its beginning, it starts all the way up here in the mountains of the eastern edge of the world. So the entire part that we've been looking at is literally just the last tiny little bit of it, and that piece of context completely changes our analysis, because the last portions of any river, what we would call the mouth of the river, are extremely complicated environments, and they often don't look like what you would think about when you think of a river. They can be estuaries, they can be deltas, they can be swamps, they can be tidal marshes or bays. There are tons of possibilities that depend on tons of complex factors. Factor, like factor 70 promo code any. We're going to refer to all of these things as hydrological zones, and if we want to figure out whether or not all of the water in The Witcher 3 is realistic, we need to figure out what kind of hydrological zone it is. Thankfully, there's a clue in the game's dialogue if you listen very carefully. This big red man refers to the area in the game as the Pontar Delta.
Pontar Delta.
So that settles it. It's a delta. It's not. If you put up a side-by-side of this map with any river delta, it'll be clear right away that The Witcher 3 is not a delta, so that's some kind of strange mistake, which is fine. But what I think The Witcher 3 might be is something called a drowned estuary. A drowned estuary is basically what happens when you have a river flowing into an ocean, but then the ocean level goes up for some reason, like global warming, melting the ice, or whatever, and then the rising tides of the ocean flood the area that the river used to flow through. One of the consequences of this is that the tides of the ocean push back against the river, which, you guessed it, can slow the flow of the river to a crawl or even cause it to appear to stop flowing entirely. So in theory, if I'm right, the map of the rivers would look something like this. You would have the main river flowing down like this, out past Oxenfurt and into the ocean around Novigrad. This is honestly probably what the original path of the Pontar River would have looked like, and it would have been much smaller at the time before the ice caps and the melting and so on. But then the river started swelling, either because of melting snow or rain, which we saw because of the big bulb here, and it started overflowing into the low-lying areas like here and here, creating these new channels. Then you've got the ocean's rising tides pushing in against the flow of the river, which both causes this region down here to flood, but also slows the flow of the Pontar itself and creates all sorts of new little pockets of water scattered around the area. And that, folks, makes it a drowned estuary. It's a pretty compelling theory, but it is just a theory. In order to know if it's real, we need to find hard evidence in-game. So that's what we're going to do. In order to figure out if something is a drowned estuary, there's really 3 pieces of evidence you need to look for. Number 1, a weirdly shaped coastline with lots of fingers and pockets. On the map, you can see the coastline here is super irregular, especially down in this area in the southwestern portion of the map. There's all kinds of little inlets and cutouts, and when we look in-game, we can actually see some of those jagged edges, the little witch's fingers, cutting inland. So that's one piece of evidence down. The second piece of evidence that we want to look for is other signs of flooding further inland. Sea level rising typically means that ice is melting. That's really the only place new water can come from. And if ice is melting, that means the global is warming. And a warmer globe means snow and ice is melting from the mountains as well and making its way into the rivers, causing them to swell. We've already talked about the fact that the river seems to be swollen based on our observations earlier, but take a look down here as well. This area is a swamp called Crookback Bog. It's not a bog, it's a swamp. Bogs are not connected to rivers or oceans, but you know, the game, it's got something wrong. Who cares? But if you follow the length of this swamp back towards the river, you can see that it's very nearly connected. And we can easily surmise that this bog is partially swamp. It's not a bog. This swamp is partially the result of the river occasionally overflowing into this area, keeping it wet and muddy and swampy. So that's 2 pieces of evidence. But the third thing we need to look for is a little more complicated, but it's kind of like the most crucial piece of evidence. We need to look for evidence of something called a saltwater intrusion. A saltwater intrusion is basically what it sounds like. Saltwater intruding. So if you've got water from the ocean flooding inland, it's bringing all of that salty water inland, which is bad because salt water kills plants, especially trees. But at the same time, you've got fresh water from the river pushing back out, which creates this battle between the two of them. That battle is the saltwater intrusion, more or less. I'm simplifying a lot. Evidence for a saltwater intrusion is subtle, but basically what we're going to be looking for is any place where a small pocket of trees or plants are dead or dying despite being near the water. And after just a few minutes of searching around The Witcher 3, I found it. Look at this. Look, do you see that? These trees are dead. These trees are not. This is salt water from the ocean. Holy shit. This is something you can see in multiple spots in the game, especially if you're looking along the shorelines nearer to the coast. Dead trees tend to be closer to the water, and trees further inland tend to be healthier. I feel like there's no way that this was on purpose, but I can't think of another reason why they would do this other than having thought through this. So it gets even better though, because you remember how we theorized that Crookback Bog, which is a swamp, not a bog, might be the result of fresh water flooding from the river competing with saltwater flooding from the ocean? The trees in Crookback Bog are also almost entirely dead, but in some pockets they're still living, which means the saltwater is mostly winning, but not entirely. Do you see how impressive this is? The level of depth you need to have of your knowledge of the hydrology of a region to come to the conclusion that you need to intermittently replace the models of trees with models of dead trees, but not too many dead trees, just some in small pockets. It's really astounding, even though it was probably an accident, maybe. So with that, we found all three pieces of evidence, which means we can probably conclude that the land of The Witcher 3 is the most accurate representation of a drowned estuary in the history of video games. Congratulations, CD Projekt Red. It sounds like I'm joking, but I actually think this is pretty incredible. If only there was some way we could check to see if the rest of the Pontar River was realistic. Welcome to The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings. This is the previous entry in the Witcher series of games released in 2011, and it turns out that this game is also set on that exact same wider world map we looked at earlier. You remember how I said that this little square was the main area of the world of The Witcher 3? Well, it turns out that The Witcher 2 is set across 4 different areas. It's set here, 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 and here. And if you look closely, you'll see every single one of these locations is along the Pontar River. No, that's not a joke. That's just an incredible coincidence. So, of course, I took it upon myself to buy and play The Witcher 2. And here's what I found. Right behind me is the first instance of the Pontar in The Witcher 2. This particular area is a place called La Valette Castle, and it's where the prologue of the game takes place. Now, The Witcher 2 is a much more restrictive game than Witcher 3. The environments are tighter, the paths are narrower, and you don't have this big open world to roam around in, so you can't just stroll down to the water and get a perfect look. But if I fire up a very clunky little cheat engine and mess with a free cam, I can kind of force the camera out there to see what's going on. So what do we actually see? Well, it looks like a fairly standard healthy river. Clear channel, steady currents, banks that look reasonably stable, nothing swampy or drowned or unusual here, at least not at first glance, which makes sense because we're further upstream, and that's kind of interesting because it gives us contrast. Downstream in The Witcher 3, we're seeing messy, brackish estuary conditions, but upstream here in The Witcher 2, it's just kind of a normal river. The second chapter of The Witcher 2 takes place a bit further up the river in a funny little fishing town called Flotsam. And here, the Pontar has taken on a much different aesthetic. It's a swamp. There's lots of fog, it's obviously humid and gross, probably warm, and up here the banks of the river look like they're less than 50 feet apart. And it's here that we find something very special. Our first official tributary, which is a source of water that contributes, hence the name, to a river. We can follow this little stream all the way back into the woods until we find its source at this waterfall here, and another stream coming from the opposite direction that flows into the main river, meaning that the flow diagram of all of this water looks like this. Here's a question for you that's going to blow your mind. Why do you think the swamp up here looks so much more lush and green and full of life compared to the swamp in The Witcher 3? What's the main difference? I'll give you a second. It's salt water. Somehow, even though this game came out 4 years earlier, The Witcher 2 is hydrologically consistent with The Witcher 3. Insane. Do you feel euphoric? I feel euphoric. And we're still not done. After Flotsam, we get to our third Pontar appearance in The Witcher 2, and this one is really majestic. This is a portion of the river along a military camp featuring small beaches where you can hop down and get your feet wet. Just like in Flotsam, this area also has one tributary, which is a small stream running inland a ways before disappearing up into the mountains behind some creepy blue fog. My favorite thing about this stream is that the NPCs sometimes fish along it, which makes it feel really real and kind of down to earth. I also just love how Xbox 360 games look. The most notable thing about the Pontar in this area is its size. It's humongous, probably even wider than it is in The Witcher 3, which is interesting. You see, typically, as rivers continue onwards towards their endpoint, they get bigger on account of more water keeps getting added to them as they pass nearby streams and lakes and so on. And once water has entered a river, it basically never leaves that river, with a few exceptions. I don't know if I've ever heard of a river on Earth where its widest point was hundreds of miles inland from its mouth. That just doesn't really make sense to me. So the idea that the river here in The Witcher 2 would be wider than it is in Flotsam, and maybe even wider than it is all the way in The Witcher 3, that's probably just a mistake. The only possible explanation is that what we're looking at here isn't a river, but a lake that's along the river. But none of the maps of the world have a lake on it, and everybody talks about the city here being along the Pontar, so it's most likely just an oversight. Oh well, you can't win them all. Theoretically, there's one more area in The Witcher 2 that takes place along the Pontar, but unfortunately, based on the maps and gameplay I saw, this particular area is restricted to inside of a walled city, which does not give you a view of the river. I could be wrong. I played the game for 4 days straight when I bought it. This was like a week ago, and I wasn't able to get far enough to check the last level for myself, but it seems likely that what we've seen is the very last available sections of this majestic river. You and I have laid eyes on the entirety of the Pontar River as it is available. Pretty cool. And yes, I did check to see if the Pontar was in The Witcher 1. It is not. I gotta say, it does feel pretty interesting to follow a river across multiple different video games. We've never done that before, and I'm not even sure that there are any other games that I can think of that take place along different sections of the same river. If there are and I'm just forgetting about them, definitely let me know down below, right after you subscribe. So, to answer the question posed from the start of this video, where does the river in The Witcher 3 come from, and where does it go? Let's take a big picture look. The river starts all the way in the mountains to the east, flows past a lake, becoming a fairly standard river for a while. Eventually it gets quite wide like we saw, taking on lots more water from the surrounding hills and mountains, before hitting a flat plain, causing the water to spread out all over the place, which slows it way down, and allows all of that water to feed millions of beautiful plants and trees, creating a swamp around Flotsam, which eventually drains into a smaller canal through the mountains near Lavalette Castle, and that continues on a ways, taking more water before eventually it hits the wide open area of The Witcher 3, spreading out, slowing down, and draining into the ocean. Pretty amazing that we were able to figure all of this out to some extent. Hopefully I didn't make any huge mistakes. I have no formal training in this, I'm just some guy who dropped out of college. The only sad part of this whole thing is that because the Pontar in The Witcher 3 is such a big, slow river without clear tributaries, we didn't get to make one of our classic river diagrams like we did for Breath of the Wild and Red Dead Redemption 2. And I love those diagrams. Thankfully, I've got a solution for that as well. If you were paying close attention, you might have noticed that there's a small set of streams in the upper right of the map here in The Witcher 3 that I've been ignoring, and that's because those streams are completely unconnected to everything we've been talking about so far. It's just a totally independent hydrological system. Well, okay, not totally independent, right? Because water evaporates and turns into rain, which fuels the water cycle, but it's physically independent, you know what I'm saying? What do you say we do a quick mapping of this whole system, just for old time's sake? We'll start over here, where we can find a small stream, one that's actually flowing for a change, coming out of these rocks and heading through some beautiful woods to the east. Eventually, it goes over a waterfall, kind of an odd-looking waterfall to be honest, and then through another really lovely area, past a small fishing village, and into a big lake. One of the funny things about this area is that right where the stream meets the lake, you can really clearly see the dividing line between the flowing water and the static water, which is one of two very funny video game mistakes that this area has. The second one is just a little bit later. The area around this lake is awesome. If you ever get the itch to just wander around a little cohesive community in a video game, I think this is a great place to do it because there's just tons of cool details. But we're just focused on the hydrology. Continuing clockwise around the lake, we find another stream heading into the lake. This one basically heads straight up into the hills before going off the edge of the map. On the eastern edge of the lake is another stream, but this one is flowing out of the lake down into another lake, which is off the edge of the map as well, but that we can see if we open up the map itself. On the south side of the lake is the biggest tributary in this system, which is a stream that heads straight back into a marshy area that eventually starts way up in this little town. Off of that stream, we've got two more tributaries. The one from the east comes down over a waterfall and then back up into the mountains off the edge of the map. Seems to be a running theme. And the other one does something I love. It goes way up into the mountains, eventually cresting over a hill, and on top of that hill we find nothing. The water is just pooled in an incredibly shallow pond. It's not even really a pond, it's more like a puddle. Never mind the fact that this puddle doesn't have enough water to actually supply the stream that comes off of it. It's also totally inexplicable why it flows down the east side of the mountain as opposed to the west side. It should definitely go over the west side first. It's clearly way closer to the slope there. Maybe they just put this one thing in the game so that there would be at least one incredible wrong detail to nitpick for my video. Maybe they predicted I would become a YouTuber 10 years after the game came out, and then they wanted to be ready. And then lastly, there's one more really cool tributary to this lake. It's an old-timey man-made dam that's being used to create a small pond on this guy's property and to allow a consistent trickle of water for the folks down below. So this is how the one area with actually flowing streams in The Witcher 3 looks on the map. It's pretty satisfying, right? It's pretty good. This game is just absolutely packed with wonderful world-building details that I could spend another half hour going over, but I'll be honest, I am exhausted. The Red Dead 2 video we did right before this one was a ton of work, and I thought this one would be less involved, but it turns out that I just get excited about too many things. Oh, and also, you remember that whale skeleton that I pointed out at the beginning of the video and then never mentioned again? Knowing what we've talked about in this video today, how do you suppose that it got all the way over there? Use your noggin, because it's really cool once you realize it, but I'm going to let you figure it out. I'm Annie Austin. Thanks for watching.